Welcome back, guys, and I wanted to do a video on a bit of a pet peeve of mine. And this goes to a question that I get asked fairly regularly about the difference between company driving and lease operators. And it really deals with the question of, well, do you get a lot of miles? Do you get enough miles? How many miles do you get as a lease operator? And I have frequently said, as a lease operator, I don't care about miles. Now, there's a slight caveat to that. I don't 100% not care about miles, because if I get 0 miles, or if I get very few miles, it's going to be a bad thing. But you have to understand the quality of your miles. And that's the difference between being a lease operator and being a company driver. The quality of your miles as a company driver, every mile you drive, dispatch miles, deadhead miles. Again, if you don't know the difference between dispatch and deadhead miles, miles that you're taking out of route that you've been told to go somewhere that have been assigned to you by a dispatcher, you're going to get paid for those. And you're going to get paid a set rate for those miles. It changes as Prime, and as every company, some companies start you out at a very low rate. Prime starts you out and has always started out tanker drivers at a pretty decent rate, 50 cents per mile, 51, 52 cents per mile, somewhere around there. I apologize, I don't know the current number off the top of my head. But every mile that you are asked to drive by Prime, you're going to get paid for. So if you, as an example, today, if I were a company driver, I was asked to drive 165 miles from Decatur, Indiana to Canton, Michigan. And then I would have been paid for the 165 miles back from Canton, Michigan to Decatur, Indiana. And if you just throw 50 cents out, that's $165 for today's work. Now, what you have to understand as a difference between a lease operator and a company driver is the number of miles are largely irrelevant. What's relevant is the quality of those miles. And what I mean by the quality of those miles is how much is the rate. So when a lease operator gets a load assignment here at Prime, you're going to get an estimated revenue for that load assignment sent along with it. Now, Prime's not going to break it down on a cents per mile basis. That's up to you, and it's up to you to be able to figure. And this is why people say, if you don't know what you're doing, you need to learn a little bit about what you're doing before you become a lease operator. You need to understand the thought process behind it. You need to know what's a good load. You need to know what's not a good load. You need to know what's a good paying load. And in my case, it's not as big a deal, because everything a lot of discussion about lease operators and getting into good freight lanes. That's not relevant for me, because everything I do is go out and come back to the place that I'm going to reload. So I'm not as concerned. When they're talking about freight lanes, as a driver, they're talking about, if I go from Decatur, Indiana to Canton, Michigan, is Canton, Michigan a good place to pick up a load after I'm empty? So that's what they're talking about when they're talking about good freight lanes. I don't worry about that, because at the end of my delivery, I'm coming right back to a place I know I can get a load, Decatur, Indiana, because that's what I do. So that part is not as big a deal. What is a big deal is how much you get paid for a load. And the difference between a lease operator and a company driver is it's not a set amount. It's not, well, I'm getting paid 50 cents a mile. It's not, I'm getting paid $1 a mile. It's not, I'm getting paid $2 a mile. And the reason that it's different and that it's a larger figure for a lease operator than a company driver is because you have expenses. All those expenses that a lease operator has are being covered when you are a company driver, by the company. The company owns the truck. The company is paying for the insurance on the truck. The company is paying the disability insurance. The company is paying the permits and the fees and the IFTA tax and the fuel and all of that stuff. So that's why you're getting paid less. As a lease operator, you're paying that out of your own pocket. Now, that's the reason that loads pay differently. So that's also the reason that I don't care about miles to some extent. And again, it's not 100% that I don't care about miles. What I care about is revenue. I care about how much revenue I can generate from the truck, because first of all, I have a fixed dollar amount, a fixed cost that's associated with running this truck for 1 week. And it's all based on running a truck for a week. And it happens, after 7 days, you start over from zero. So you start from zero with a negative balance, basically, of here's how much my fixed cost is. If I don't move the truck for 7 days, I still have my fixed cost, because you owe the lease payment, you owe those permits and fees, and all that stuff, the insurance that has to be on this truck, because part of that insurance is, even if it's just sitting in a yard, if somebody hits this truck, you still need to have insurance on it. So even if you take a week off, you still have to pay the insurance on it, because the company, if it's a company truck, the company's paying insurance on it while it's sitting in a yard. So you have that fixed cost associated even if the truck is not moving. Now, once you start moving, you add the biggest variable cost that you will typically generate. And the biggest variable cost that changes depending on how you drive, and it's fuel. How you drive, how fast you drive, the style that you drive. Are you an aggressive driver? Are you laid back? Where you shift, depending on if you choose to use, and again, this is an automated manual truck that I'm in now, but it still can be shifted manually. I've gone over that before. But your fuel is going to be a variable cost. I get a little over 8 miles per gallon. If you do some math, and I've written a couple little notes here down, 37.5 cents for every mile I drive goes to fuel. So if I'm only making 50 cents a mile, and I'm putting 37.5 cents in at 8 miles per gallon, I'm not coming out ahead. I'm only making 12.5 cents that goes into my pocket. And that doesn't even mention the fixed cost, which, if you break fixed costs down, again, if the truck doesn't move, so we're talking, take the fixed cost divided by 7 for 7 days in a week, you're still talking about you have to generate $165 a day to pay off the fixed costs in this truck. Obviously, if you take a day off or a weekend off, that figure increases. So then you divide that fixed cost by 5 or 6 instead of by 7. So what you're looking at when you are looking at miles is, rather than how many miles am I getting, you're looking at how much revenue can I generate, and how much revenue, and when you're looking at fuel, then how much revenue can I generate per mile. But revenue really is the key factor. Again, if someone asked me how many miles do you get, I honestly, I wouldn't necessarily know, because it's not particularly relevant. I can tell you how much revenue I have generated this week, how much revenue I generated last week, and give or take, I can give you an idea of how much revenue certain loads that we do pay. And to give you an idea, typically you're not going to see a lot of freight that is less than $1 a mile as a lease operator. There is low-paying freight out there that's going to be less than $1 a mile. You can start to do some of the math at $165 per day, 37.5 cents per mile in fuel, and that's factoring at gas. That's figuring fuel at $3 a gallon, by the way, for 37.5 cents per mile. But when you start looking at how do you make money, and I'm throwing out a lot of numbers here, you start thinking, well, geez, you're owing $165, you're in the hole right off the bat. $165 each day, you have to generate that before you even put fuel in the tank, let alone any repairs, anything like that. To give you an example and why I don't necessarily care about miles, one of the best paying loads out of Decatur, Indiana goes a round trip 58 miles. Now, it's not the best paying load as far as most revenue, because there are loads that pay 2 and even almost 3 times as much as this one pays. But on a per mile basis, a load that goes 58 miles pays almost, or actually over, it's almost $7 a mile. It's almost it's over $6, closer to $7 per mile. So you're not burning a lot of fuel because you're not going very far. And a lot of that money's getting put right back in your pocket. So do I care that I'm only going 58 miles on that day? No, I'd rather do that and get paid, and it's around $400 if you could do the math. I'd rather do that and get paid $400 than do something that's 150 miles round trip and get paid a little bit more. Because even though it might pay a little bit more, you're spending more money on fuel. And in the grand scheme of things, you're probably not going to make as much in that given day. The load that I did today was about 320 miles round trip. It ended up paying about $2 per mile. So you start to look at, and again, you start looking at these, well, gee, $6 per mile, $2 per mile, you're just raking in the money. It's tons of, but again, you have to stop and think. $165 per day before you even turn the ignition on in the truck. Fuel costs, if there's anything that needs to go into the shop, these things you have to pay for. And I'm not saying you can't make money as a lease operator, because obviously I have been doing it for approaching 5 years, 4.5 plus years. And I've laid out how much money I have made after those fixed costs and variable costs, fuel, shop bills, all that stuff in some other videos. But that pet peeve, how many miles do you get? If that's your mentality, you're not thinking about how lease operators function, how they work. You need to get into a different frame of mind when you stop and think about, how does leasing work? How does this, and I've laid out a nice video that goes into detail on my settlement sheet that explains how leasing works. And I don't think once in that entire video did I mention how many miles, or that I really cared about how many miles I ran that particular week. But I still get questions to my videos, whether it be comments or email questions, or people find me other ways. How many miles do you get? Any given week, I couldn't even begin to tell you how many miles I get in a given week, and I honestly don't care. So I apologize for a little bit of frustration out of me, but I keep getting that question, and I wanted to address it. I do certainly hope everybody has a wonderful holiday. I'm not going to make a video here for a couple of weeks, so I hope everybody enjoys Christmas 2019 and New Year's 2020. I'll be back after that. Probably the first video I'll do will be a 6-month review of this truck. And then once we get into February, it'll be my 5-month anniversary with Prime, and I'll be heading back to Springfield for another driver advisory board, so we'll have some topics to tackle at that point. So there you go. Thanks for watching. Again, I apologize for a little bit of getting, it's just one of those you have to get off your chests, but just frequently get that question. How many miles do you get? Don't know, don't care. I'm not concerned about miles. Talk to me about revenue. Thanks for watching. If you do want to come to Prime, as always, link in the description will take you directly to the application. As always, if you do have questions, you can comment below, or you can use that email address and send them to me. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again in the new year. Thanks.